So Ashutosh Garg is the founder of the brand called You, Guardian Pharmacy and Equation Coaching. He brings the stories of successful entrepreneurs, professionals, and senior corporate leaders to thousands of listeners through his video and podcast series. Ash coaches and mentors several CEOs in India on business matters, governance, strategic planning, succession planning, personal accountability, and people and culture issues. He has over 40 years of experience in various industries, including retail, aerospace, and FMCG. Ash is a YPO member, a WEF Global Leader for Tomorrow, and a TIE Charter member. And he serves on several boards and advises companies on strategy and governance matters. Wonderful to have you here. You're not a financial advisor, but you have tons of experience on how to be a successful business leader and entrepreneur. So we're going to be diving into the mindset, all of that today.
You're listening to Wealthy Advisor Mindset Podcast, a show dedicated to helping financial advisors grow their AUM while enjoying a great quality of life by creating a high-performance mindset. Guiding you on this podcast is none other than Nina Cook, a seasoned mindset coach who has worked with hundreds of business owners over the last decade to dissolve all their self-sabotaging behaviors and habits to achieve their business goals so they can have a much bigger impact and make much more money. Throughout the show, we'll deliver actionable strategies to grow your practice more easily and quickly, while revealing the incredible possibilities that emerge when you tap into your best self. Ready for a breakthrough that amplifies your impact and profits? Let's dive in.
I'd like to start by asking you about the highlights in your journey where you have felt that your mindset has played a significant role in helping you to make decisions or to pivot to create the success that you enjoy today.
Hey, thank you, Nina, for inviting me to your podcast. I'm delighted to be speaking to your viewers and listeners. I think that the topic that you have selected is how mindset can be a game changer for any businessman, any individual, any professional. My own journey, Nina, I started working with India Tobacco, or ITC as it's called, which is owned by British American Tobacco when I was 21 years old. That was all of 45, 46 years ago. As a corporate manager, one goes through one's own ups and downs, highlights, and there are high phases, low phases in one's career. I remember one particular stage when the chairman of the company called me and he said, I think the board has decided we need to have an office in Singapore. And I asked him, but what do you want me to do? He said, I don't know. And this was the chairman of a multi-billion dollar company. So I said, but if you're going to send me to Singapore, you need to tell me what my mandate is going to be. And he said, well, I don't know. The board feels like this, but he opened his drawer, took out a blank sheet of paper with his letterhead, and he signed at the bottom and said, go and write your own mandate. Now, that was for a 32-year-old great opportunity and yet a frightening one. Packed my bags, reached Singapore, and we built a $250 million company, there with presence in multiple locations around the world. So, that was one game changer I always think is important. The second one I love to talk about is in 2003. I was in aerospace in those days. I was running Asia for two large American aerospace companies. And I was traveling 22 days a month around the world. We had relocated from Singapore back to New Delhi. And I remember this one trip in 2003 in March when I traveled from Singapore to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Taipei, Taipei to Jakarta, Jakarta to I think one more place. And finally, I was in Seoul in South Korea. When I was lying in bed at 6 o'clock in the morning looking at the ceiling, I couldn't remember which country I was in. And that is when I realized this is the time to call it quits. So I came back and I quit the corporate world. I was 44, 45 years old then. And I remember writing in my very first book, I said on the 1st of April, I woke up, I had no job, I had no appointments, I had no secretary, and I realized I had joined the ranks of the educated unemployed. And then I started the whole process of finding out what I want to do, and we started to build a chain of retail pharmacies very much like Boots in India. And we built the brand. The chain was called, or is called, Guardian Pharmacy. And we built it into India's second largest chain. So, I've been through all kinds of very interesting opportunities. I've been through lots of ups and downs in my life. But I think the more important thing was that the focus remained unchanged. And once we start, I mean, what I've always believed is once I've started, then we've got to keep going, no matter what happens.
So
That's
what is that? Yeah, once you start something, so you started your new business, you quit your corporate career to start a new business. So what role did your mindset play and how did it help you to think big at that point? Were you thinking big or were you just thinking, well, I'll just start one?
No, I'll explain that. There's a very
One
interesting.
store? Or were you thinking big right from the beginning?
Absolutely right. So, I tell you an interesting story related to this. When I quit the corporate world and I wrote my first business plan, the first line of that business plan was build Boots in India. That's how it started. And I remember when I opened my first store, I had moved my assistant from my earlier company to work with me. And I remember, called my wife and said, I don't know what has happened to him. How can he, feed so many people just by running one shop? And I would tell them that, listen, we're going to build it into a very major chain. And it was very difficult to believe. And I even remember this one other instance. My MBA batchmates were in leading roles in their own companies. And if I'd go and meet them, they would meet me. And when I'd say, hey, listen, why don't you do a tie-up with me? They say, I said, we would say that we would be a very big chain one of these days. And they'd say, yeah, tell us another one. But when you're ready, come back to us. I'd go to bankers and say, would you fund me? And they'd say, yeah, but, you're too small to be funded. And the day we crossed 25 stores, suddenly all these guys were calling me back and saying, hey, listen, when can we start getting into a strategic tie-up? Or the bankers would call and say, how much more money do you need? So I think it was a very fascinating journey that I went through, just learning how being in a situation where you had to think big, you were not yet big, but you had to keep your team going only because you were trying to convince them that, hey, listen, this is going to be a growth opportunity for you and you're in a business that will grow significantly.
So this is really interesting because you said it was difficult for people to believe your vision.
Correct.
You are having to keep hold of that vision in spite of people around you saying, oh, come on, you're not going to be able to do that. So how did you manage to keep hold of that dream when people around you were saying, that's not going to happen?
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy because remember that when I quit in 2003, I was, from the professional world, the highest taxpayer in the country. And I'd got a letter from the income tax department saying, congratulations on everything that you've done. And the next year, I had almost zero income. I got a letter saying, are you sure you've disclosed all your income? So, I would be lying if I say that the thought didn't cross me many times. What have I given up my corporate career, flying first class, doing this, doing that, and then suddenly now flying coach and trying to build it. But I was just convinced that this was an opportunity that had come and I had to keep pushing.
Have you always found it easy to think big, or did you have to really train your mind in that way?
Well, I would say I've been fortunate to have worked for very big companies, which helped me to train my mind to think big. Case in point is my podcast, the brand called You. I started this 5.5 years ago. And, you're a podcaster yourself. One of the biggest challenges with podcasters is that after some time, they're not able to keep the momentum going. And I said, no, my clear vision for myself was that we're going to build the world's largest digital library of knowledge, experience, and wisdom. We started releasing 2 episodes a day, 6 days a week. We continue to do that. And we have over 3,000 episodes. And we get about 150,000 views and listens every single day. In the last 3 years, I've been discovered by PR agencies from all over the world saying, hey, we've got a great guest for you. I just think the whole challenge is that in your mind, you've got to convince yourself that what you're doing is the right thing. Once you're convinced yourself, then you're able to carry your own team to say that I think we are doing the right thing. And maybe once past credibility helps to carry the team in the early stages. And later on, the work that we are all doing carries it through.
I think it's remarkable, absolutely remarkable to write down one sentence, I'm going to build boots in India, and to stay with that goal and not waver on it.
Correct.
How do you convince yourself? Because there must have been times when you thought, this is really difficult. Another challenge comes up. You're fighting fires. How do you convince yourself and to stick on that path and stay on that path?
Well, I would say part of it is the resilience that was built into me when I was growing up as a child. My father was a very celebrated and decorated Army brigadier. My mother was an educator, but she taught us the power of faith and the power of God. Whenever one was confronted with a challenge, one would turn to one's roots and say, we can't give up. There's no reason to give up, not because you're tired, not because some things are not working out. One should give, we were always taught we can give up when you know that something is wrong, and therefore you don't need to carry on doing the same thing over and over again. But if the work that you are doing is right, if you're being appreciated by your customers, then there was no reason to call it a day just because you'd had some challenges in some stores, in some locations in the country.
So how do you get over setbacks? When something goes wrong, or you're faced with a difficult situation, whether it's involving people or whatever it is, how do you think about setbacks and how do you bounce back from them?
So setbacks is a part of life. I don't think there would be anyone in the world who can say that, I've not had a single setback. I've had a lot of setbacks myself. What I've always learned and what I've always told my children and all my young colleagues is that when there is a setback, learn from it, keep looking ahead rather than keep looking behind and fretting and fuming and saying, oh, I wish I had done it this way and that may have had a different result. Because there's nothing you can do about something that has already passed. The whole thing has been in my own mind to keep telling myself and my teams that let's learn from what went wrong and let's just keep moving forward.
Okay, so you don't have a big pity party.
No.
And it's interesting, you said rather than looking back, you look ahead. And I think this is where most people stay stuck in their lives because they're looking over their shoulder at, their past events. Oh, well, I tried that and it didn't work, therefore it won't work again. Or I know someone who tried that and it didn't work, therefore I mustn't try that. And there's a real fear that comes into their minds when they think about taking a risk.
Correct.
You took a big risk. You left a well-paid corporate job to start with nothing and build something from scratch.
Yes.
What is your thinking around risk-taking?
There is sensible risk and there is a risk for the sake of taking risk. When I started Guardian Pharmacy, I knew I was going to bet the house, so to speak, in this new company, but I made sure I got, sat down with my wife and my children. They were at their college-going age, time when most families have their highest financial commitments. But just said that I want to start this. I have made sure that I'm setting aside an amount of money that would not impact their lifestyle. And they gave me their full support on that. So I took a risk, but I did not take a risk which was so silly that, I was out on the streets or my family was out on the streets. Having said that, we have all seen risks being taken by people in different areas, different kinds of risks. When it comes to business and, people would ask me, do you want to go to the casino? And I said, no, but I bet the house every day in my company. So I don't need to go and bet or take risks in a casino. But I think being able to take risks is also a function of a mind that can not waver if there's a problem. So risk will always be there. We need to be able to face it, confront it, and find a way around it.
And how do you differentiate between the risks which are worth taking and the ones which you don't need to take?
Well, one can make out, with the moment you're confronted with a risk, you can make out, is this going to be a silly risk And I'll give you some examples. And I don't mean to offend any individuals, but for example, I would never go climbing a mountain because I'm not trained to be a mountain climber. Now, for me, that's a risk that I would not take. People who are trained may find that easy, but they may not want to build a business. So my risk taking was restricted to those areas where I knew I had adequate training and where I knew I had the ability to think through any problems that may come up. And there were problems. Um, so there are risks and risks and risks in life. So I have taken risks which are sometimes dangerous, but not things that are life-threatening or things that could impact my family or my relationships with people.
You are obviously very disciplined. When you say you're going to
I
do
am.
something, you stick to it. So 2
Right.
podcasts a day, 6 days a week. I put out 1 episode a week. That is a tremendous amount of discipline, commitment, and dedication. So is that how you think? If you make a commitment in your mind, you always follow through?
Absolutely. It's not just a commitment that I make to myself, but it's also a commitment that I make to anybody else. That if I've made a commitment, then that commitment is cast in stone, so to speak, and therefore it has to be done. A commitment is a commitment, and I don't think I ever go back on a commitment. And if I do have to, then I would call the individual and explain the challenges in my not being able to meet that commitment.
So that means in your mind, you trust yourself. You trust
Absolutely.
yourself that when you say you're going to do something, you will carry through with it. And not only do you tell yourself that, you tell other people, so you have accountability from other people. You
Correct.
bring them into your mission, as it were.
Correct. Not only do I trust myself, but all my life I have always been told that I trust other people far too much. And that could be the reason why I think like this. But I do trust myself, certainly, and the people I'm interacting with.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of taking action, to grow your businesses, how did you decide which actions to focus on? Because there are so many different things that we can do as an entrepreneur. There's processes, systems, sales, marketing, admin, building teams, delivering the service. So how do you decide which actions to focus on that will make the biggest impact to your growth?
This is a very interesting question, Nina. What you need to focus on keeps changing as your business grows. I may have been whatever I was in the corporate world, and however senior I may have been. But when I founded my own company, and they were all of 6 people in it, I remember one of the ladies came and said that the cleaner hadn't come, and therefore the toilet wasn't clean. And I just picked up a broom and went and cleaned the toilet. And they were surprised that how would I do that? I would walk into a store and find that a store was dirty, and I would just pick a broom and clean the store. So those were some challenges that one faced in the early days. And therefore, at that particular time, what was very important was that the store must look clean, the customer experience must be very good, etc. As the numbers started to grow, there were people issues, there were branding issues, there were issues relating to supply chains. And as we grew, we got more and more people, more specialists in each of these areas. And therefore, I was able to interact with the specialists. So I wouldn't say that I was prioritizing anything and say this morning or as I wake up in the morning, let me go and address marketing today, or let me go and wake up and look at the supply chains today. But it's a normal process for an entrepreneur every day, because there are so many fires she or he are fighting every day that your attention automatically is given to what you and your team believes is the most important factor at that particular point of time.
So you showed leadership. You would clean the toilet, and it's like, I'm not going to ask you to do something that I'm not prepared to do myself.
Correct.
So you led by example. They could trust you in that way as well.
Absolutely. Yes.
What do you believe leadership is? I mean, whether you're running a solopreneur company or whether you have a small team or a big team, what is leadership for you?
Well, I think the most important factor for leadership for myself is the fact that I'm able to manage my own self make sure that whatever I am doing is something which I'm able to justify to myself. And I will take you back to something that my father taught me when I was just finishing school and going off to college. And he would tell me that every morning when you're standing in front of the mirror shaving, if you can look at yourself in the eye and say, yesterday I did not knowingly harm anybody and I did not knowingly do anything wrong, that's the only justification you will need. And I think that has stood me very, very well in my leadership journey, because I've often said that as a leader, as long as I'm doing the right thing for my team, doing the right thing for the people who are dependent on me or who are working with me, I don't need to be doing anything else. So it's not something that I will be able to say that I'm going to be like someone else. Leadership for me is how I come across to my own colleagues on my team and how I present myself, and I'm able to give them direction as and when they believe I should be present in front of them and be able to deliver whatever I think is right at that particular point of time.
Your father was a very wise man.
It was.
And he built into you the values, the value system that you could look yourself in the face every day and saying, I'm doing a good job here.
Correct.
Wonderful. So I'd like to finish by asking you a question. And that question is, what is the greatest lesson that life has taught you so far?
Well, I would say, one has been through the hard knocks of life, over the years. The first thing I would say is have the courage to keep moving ahead. And if you're faced with any adversity, look at adversity in the eye and say, I'm not going to get frightened, but I will fight the whole thing. Second thing I have always learned is that get rid of the negativity that is there in one's life, which really means that don't compare yourself with others and don't keep thinking, oh, that person harmed me in some particular way, which goes against what I said some time back, is that always just looking ahead. And the third one, from my perspective, is that if you're faced with an opportunity, grab it now. Don't let an opportunity pass and then later on say that, oh, I wish I had been able to do something different.
Wonderful. Great life lessons to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How can our listeners find out more about you and the wonderful?
The best way is to look at my LinkedIn profile. Just search for me. I am fairly active on LinkedIn. So listeners can very easily have a look at what I'm doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and thank you for sharing all your amazing experience and mindset, expertise and values with us. Thank you so much. For everyone who's been listening and watching, thank you so much for your company today, and we will be back soon.
I hope you enjoyed the episode today on the Wealthy Advisor Mindset. Make sure to hit subscribe on your chosen platform to get notifications on upcoming episodes. If this episode made you think of someone who you think would benefit from listening to it, then go ahead, take a screenshot, and share this episode with them, or post it on your social media to share with your friends and colleagues. You can catch the show notes for this episode and any mentioned links in the description. If you are a financial advisor who is struggling to grow your AUM and profits while creating a great work-life balance, and you know it's because your mindset is stopping you, or you have a specific challenge in mind that you would love Nina's feedback on, go to chatswithnina.org and grab a time that works best for you. We'd love to see if we can help you. Once again, it's chatswithnina.org. We will see you in the next episode.